As a DIY car enthusiast, vinyl wrapping has always intrigued me. It's cost effective, and with a little patience, even a beginner can learn how to do it. It's been a dream of mine to learn to wrap an entire car, and we're doing just that with my Project S4. In the first episode on vinyl wrapping, I tackled both of the front fenders and the front bumper. Today we're going to start working towards the rear of the car. If you've missed the last episode or you're new to the channel, I am not a professional vinyl wrapper. Far from it, actually. I've wrapped a few roofs and a hood, but other than that, this is my first time vinyl wrapping an entire car. Because of that, I intend to learn as I go, and I intentionally bought way more material than I need so that I can mess up as many panels as I need to perfect my technique. Or more realistically, since perfection isn't really an attainable goal, I want to just get it looking as good as I can with the technique that I do have, and improve along the way. The first thing on the menu for today is tackling this car's doors. Unlike my TT, this is a sedan, so there are 4 we have to worry about, and that means there are 4 door handles, which have me a little bit nervous. We'll get to those in a second. I'm going door by door and prepping each right before I apply the vinyl to minimize the dust that gets on it, and I'm doing this by wiping it down with isopropyl alcohol. We washed the car in the last episode, so most of the dust isn't on there anymore. On this car, you'll notice 2 protruding trim pieces known as door blades. The top ones don't really come off since they're riveted into the door, and I don't really feel like redoing that, so we're just gonna wrap around them. My approach for those was to keep the material as loose as possible so it wasn't trying to pull itself out of the little crease. Thankfully, the only air that got trapped in the first door's crease was near the edge, so we were able to heat the material up and push it out with a squeegee. This is my first door that I've ever done, so I'm not really expecting perfection. I want to learn the techniques to do this properly, and that means practicing this door a few times, so our first attempt is really good for what it is. I was initially pretty scared to do the door handle, but this is a concave door handle, so it's really not that bad. For cars where the door handle comes out past the surface of the door, you're going to want to remove the entire thing, but since this sinks into the door, you can actually get away by cutting the material right above the door handle and sliding it underneath. This first attempt is by no means perfect, but it is a great starting point for the rest of the doors going forward. You might be wondering why I'm not immediately redoing the first door, and there's a really good reason for that. I want to maximize the learning and experience I get by vinyl wrapping the rest of the car. Since my experience is so limited, I figure we might as well try the rest of the car and get more of it before we go back and try to get better attempts at panels. There's also 4 doors, so I'm assuming that by the time I get to the later of the doors, we're going to have attempts that are good enough to keep. In my mind, it was a no-brainer since we get both experience and more of the car done at the same time. When I learn a skill like this, I usually follow a minimum viable product methodology. While not directly applicable, I think it's a really good analogy. When someone's inventing a product, or in my case learning a skill, a minimum viable product is that version of that product that is initial. That version is considered to be bare bones and simply has just enough features to validate the idea and the process as a whole. Applying this to learning, I'm basically trying to get the entire car covered with my initial technique. Since I'm learning as I go, more than likely we'll have panels we want to keep for the long term, but there's also going to be panels we want to improve. Once the whole car's done, we can simply look at what panels need the most improvement and improve them one at a time. But we won't be worried about time or lack of materials because the rest of the car is already to the point where we can drive it around and it functions properly. We're just looking for iterative improvements. So it can offer you peace of mind too, because you know that everything you do is actually just going to improve what's already been done. You're not going to ruin it or make it worse in any way. That's just my approach to learning a new skill though, so take it with a grain of salt. Just like I predicted, the second door I attempted was easier, faster, and looked better than the first one. Specifically around the door blade was where I made the most improvements on this second approach. This door was passable, but there's still a lot of room for improvement. I also took this opportunity to wrap the lower door blade of the rear door as well as the door blade that's part of the rear wheel well. I have to do it anyway, so now is a perfect time. There you have it, the first attempts on these first 2 doors are complete. It was over 100 for a few days, so I haven't worked on the wrap in a while. About 70 degrees outside, so despite looking like the apocalypse, it's actually a really good temperature to continue the wrap, so we're gonna do that today. One of the more frustrating things about vinyl wrapping this car has actually been entirely out of my control. The technique, the preparation, and the application are entirely up to me, but what's not up to me is the weather. This vinyl is extremely temperature dependent. I mentioned this earlier, but you use a heat gun to control how the adhesive sticks and how the material's self-healing works. Each vinyl material is different, but this vinyl likes to be installed around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Over the past week, we've had a whole range of temperatures going anywhere from 68 to over 100. I found out very quickly that working with vinyl in 100 degrees is extremely different than working with this vinyl at 70 degrees. This vinyl is relaxed at 70 degrees. You can use the heat gun to change the way it feels and make it stretch or self-heal. You can't do that effectively anymore when it's 100 degrees though. When it's that warm, the whole piece of vinyl behaves like it's being constantly warmed with a heat gun, so it's really hard to stretch and get into place without any air bubbles. In other words, you're better off waiting like I did, even if it takes a few days before you can continue the process. Back to the application. The process for these second doors is the same as the first few doors that I did, so I'm going to hold myself to a higher standard. I'm not going to treat these doors like a first attempt, since I've kind of had that already since I did the same thing mirrored on the other side. I'm just going to take my time and do what I know works to try to get as good of panels as possible. This second set of doors turned out great, and to be honest, unless anything lifts over the course of the next few days, I think these two doors are good enough to keep. They are a step up over the first two doors, which is perfect because it shows we're learning. It also securely places those first two doors on the list of things I want to touch up once the whole car's done. I was losing daylight pretty quickly, so the last thing I decided to attempt for today is the rear gas cap. I got the first attempt for every door done. Some of them look a lot better than others, so at the end of everything, when we do the rest of the panels at least once, we're gonna redo the two doors that I started with. I figured I would have to. To me, they look really good, but the one problem that's not very good is where they meet up with the door trim up top. We're gonna attempt all the other panels first so I can get as much practice before I go back and redo panels such as the bumper and the doors. Progress is progress though, so I'm happy. Oh God! Oh no! I got kinda lucky that the next day was the same temperature as the previous day, so I was able to vinyl wrap again. I finished up the door blades on this side, and now it was time to tackle the main goal for today, the rear quarter panels. The rear quarter panels on this car specifically are an interesting job. The actual places you're applying the vinyl are by no means difficult, but you're using a huge piece of vinyl. For most cars, I think it's going to be the largest piece of vinyl you're going to have to use in this entire process because it generally stretches all the way to the front of the car. The application process itself is really no different, it's just a lot of cutting the vinyl slowly so that you make sure you don't cut too much or cut too little. That, and once you get everything trimmed, you have to spend a lot of time tucking this vinyl into the proper spaces. The rubber trim you tuck it behind can get pretty annoying if you're not too careful. I knew I didn't have enough time to finish this today, but I wanted to at least get everything laid down and glossed out. Well, I have to take a break for today. We're going to pick this up in the morning. I'm going to a food festival and I need to get there on time, even though it is completely pouring outside. Unfortunately, the day after that was a bit too warm to properly vinyl wrap, so I had to wait until a little bit later in the week. Thankfully, since I got all of this glossed out before we took a break, it didn't really affect the process that much. All I had left to do on this side was to cut it and tuck it into the proper place, that being the chrome trim and the rubber trim by the windows. Tucking the vinyl in here would be a lot more difficult had I not found a crazy amount of random sized squeegees that I could use to shove it into place. You have to use a ton of vinyl when you do one of these quarter panels. I'm assuming I'm going to have to redo at least one of these, but I want to practice as much as I can on the first attempt so that when I do the second side, I can hopefully not have to waste that vinyl. I'd rather use that for attempting other things or improving pieces that actually need it. Overall, I ended up being pretty happy with this first attempt. I wasn't sure how much of the vinyl I used for the rear quarter panel to take inside the door jamb. I think it would look a little goofy to not do the door jambs because you'd open the door and it would be blue, completely ruining the illusion. We'll cover the door jambs eventually, but they're going to be really easy to do with inlays, so they're not a huge priority at the moment. After finishing the rear quarter panel, I wanted to wrap up most of this side, so I decided to do this side skirt. This panel was pretty simple since it's straight, and the only real difficulty comes with tucking it under the doors without wrinkling or tearing through the vinyl. So if you take your time, it's not that hard, and I think this was a pretty good first attempt. Just like the vinyl on the front bumper, don't worry about how the bottom of this is going to be held on. I've got a matching surprise coming with the custom front lip. This is honestly a pretty cool milestone when it comes to wrapping this car. The mirror excluded, this side of the car is wrapped. And I'm honestly pretty happy with this as a first attempt. Realistically, the only thing on this side that I potentially want to redo is the rear quarter panel. And that's only because when I do the next one, I end up finding a few easier ways to do things that results in a little bit cleaner looking edges. Other than that, this side is solid, and I'm ready to move on to the next side, which is a lot of the exact same process. As far as what I improved in my second attempt at a rear quarter panel, it was honestly my whole approach. In the first attempt, I started at the front of the car and glassed out going back towards the trunk. I actually did the exact opposite for this attempt. There's a lot more stretching that has to be done in the back of the car, so at the end of the day, this made it a little bit easier since that was the initial focus. Since it was my second go around, I did a better job of cutting the vinyl so I had just enough material to tuck into the molding and not too much that it comes out. From what I've read online, that kind of comes with experience and varies based on a case-by-case basis. So when I redo the first rear quarter panel, I think we'll be able to make it a lot better. Though I only actually had problems in 2 single spots, and they're hardly noticeable. Tucking the vinyl in the rear wheel well is a little bit harder than tucking it in the front wheel well because we can't just hide it under the wheel liner. For now, I just used heat and stretching to stick it in the wheel liner so it's relaxed back there. If it ends up lifting or falling out, we'll adjust our approach and reevaluate what to do. You'll notice on this side I also take the material inside the door jamb a lot further. With the door shut, you can look at the panel gap in the rear and you'll actually be able to slightly see into the door jamb if you look closely enough. This could absolutely be done with an inlay without any problems, but I figured I had the material, so we might as well see what it looks like. We got a few panels that I want to redo so far. We're adding to the list constantly. I want to touch up the front bumper, maybe reevaluate how many inlays we use. I want to go through and redo the first 2 doors that we did and potentially redo all the door handles just because I want to wrap it a little bit more intelligently. I also think we need to redo our first rear quarter panel because it's lifting in 2 spots and it's not really a big issue, but it's one that will bother me if we leave it. So we have the material, might as well do it. Most of the work we still have to do is in the rear of the car, so now is a perfect time to flip the car around. Prepare for a really rough E85 start since we haven't done this in a while. I'm still working on the E85 tuning video for this car, but as you can tell, E85 doesn't necessarily like to sit. The car runs amazing on it, but if you don't start it for a while, it's kinda rough. Anyways, we've made a ton of progress today, and I think it's time we step back and look at what we've done. This car is looking insanely better, and I'm honestly blown away with how the wrap is looking so far. It is not perfect, but it is pretty cool for a first attempt. And I think by the next episode, we'll be able to finally say that our first attempt is done and see this car out in the sun to see what changes we want to make. To say I'm excited would be a complete understatement. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch my video. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed it and want to see more like it, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more. It's the best way you can support my content. Either way, I hope you are as excited as I am for the next episode. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day.